it's like by deciding not to judge and deciding instead to extend compassion or tenderness, it changes everything. I mean, it is like mind-blowing. It changes the energy, but it's like it completely changes the relationship. I've written a book called Radical Acceptance: The Secret to Happy, Lasting Love. And the idea is simple but powerful. It's all about loving without judgment. In fact, I like to talk about taking one big step further and replacing judgment with compassion and empathy. In being married and being with the love of my life for a very long time, he is brilliant and charming and the greatest man alive, except for when he's not. And then, oh, sometimes I want to kill him. And I recognized how common that feeling was, and in a very serious way, how in some cases, in our relationship, it was truly debilitating. I talk about in the book, and I freely talk about how my marriage brought me to my knees, and I was with the love of my life. I kept wanting him to change. I kept blaming him. And what I eventually reached was the last possible conclusion. After trying everything, I finally reached the conclusion that I can't expect him to change. I have to change. And I needed to take that leadership role in our relationship. And he is he's Harvard Business School, he's Stanford, he's a natural leader. But when it came to our relationship, we both had our shortcomings. And what it ultimately amounted to, as much as we loved each other and how we purported to love each other, neither of us felt loved enough by one another. And I realized that I needed to be the one to take that leap and say, okay, I'm going to love you no matter what. I am going to replace, instead of judging you, instead of continuing to focus on the shortcomings in our relationships, my own frustrations, heartache, all the negativity that I associated either with his unique character traits or in the relationship itself. I said, I'm either going to completely love him, or I need to get out of this relationship. And so I just said, I'm going to completely love him. And that's what changed everything. That's why I call it radical acceptance, because it isn't just about let me tolerate these things. It really is looking at those challenges that another person has, or the challenges in the relationship, and instead of being angry about them, and I'm not asking you to necessarily love them, but I am asking people, and I've asked this of myself, to really try to make peace with those things. And it's, it's always the easy parts that are lovable. It's easy to love the lovable parts. He's charming, he's handsome, he's brilliant. Of course, it's those unlovable parts that are hard to love, but those are the parts that need love the most. And so this idea of radical acceptance is loving somebody in their entirety and really trying to make peace and extend some tenderness and compassion to those parts of them that are hard for you. So the big difference between accepting and embracing even versus tolerating is it is a total shift. I mean, I talk a lot about opening your heart and your mind to someone else, and what that gives back to you is the greatest sense of healing, liberation, and empowerment, because what I've discovered in my own relationship challenges, as well from doing the extensive research that I've done on the book over the years that I've been developing it, is we basically are our own worst enemies when we judge. And it's like we're just limiting ourselves by judging another person and by just continuing to focus on the negativity versus saying, how can I open my heart and change the relationship with either the trait that I don't like or this disconnect in the relationship. It's like by deciding not to judge and deciding instead to extend compassion or tenderness to that thing, it changes everything. I mean, it is like mind-blowing what a different, it changes the energy, but it's like it completely changes the relationship. And in fact, I've got a wonderful mentor who I quote in the book. His name is David Bell. He talks about how in Kabbalah, the opponent isn't the other person in the relationship. The opponent in the relationship is your reaction to what happens in the relationship and what arises. And so when I think about, again, this idea of saying tolerance versus acceptance, tolerance is saying, okay, I'm gonna grit my teeth and I'm still gonna be mad about it effectively. Acceptance is about meeting that person where they are, and particularly when it comes to those challenging traits, whether it's anger or criticism or depression or sloppiness. I mean, oh my God, the list goes on forever. From the more, let's say, superficial ones to the more hardcore, serious, hard ones. But it's those particularly hardcore, serious, hard ones where nobody wants to feel angry. Nobody wants to feel like they're always criticizing. My feeling is that certain of those traits are completely inborn, or they're sort of like deep within. And by extending love and tenderness to those things and not taking them so personally, you just really give the person, I think of it as giving the person and yourself the greatest gift in the world, because it does completely change the dynamic of how you relate. And you're able to meet somebody that you care about where they are, and it's a completely different dynamic. I always emphasize when we're talking about extending compassion and empathy to the person in your relationship, your boyfriend or your husband, your girlfriend, it's equally as important to extend compassion and empathy to yourself. And so that is a fundamental facet of radical acceptance. I often talk about how it's easy to love his lovable parts. He's charming, he's funny, he's kind, he's all these great things except for when he's not. And then you might want to kill him. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so this idea of saying, hey, it's all about radical acceptance, it's all about me radically accepting him, ha ha ha, not so fast. So much about radical acceptance isn't about his unlovable parts, but one's own unlovable parts. So this idea of saying, how can I be a little bit more tender and compassionate to myself, and maybe a little bit more introspective, is a very fundamental starting point. So there are 5 steps. So with that, there are 5 steps of radical acceptance, and I'm going to go through all 5 and just give a couple of sentences as to what each of them are. And I should also emphasize radical acceptance is a practice with the emphasis on practice. It is meant to be super actionable, and I underpin it with a lot of scientific data and brain research and neurobiology and a lot of good stuff. But ultimately, it is about each person saying, how can I practice it, ideally each step. So step number 1 is very foundational, and it's simply just love him or just dump him. And I say it, and I don't mean to be harsh, but it is very binary when it comes to a long-lasting relationship. And if you're dating somebody and you don't know, by all means, keep dating, have fun, get to know this person. But at a certain point, if you're with them for maybe a year, certainly if you've been in a marriage for longer than that, and you're wondering whether he's the right guy for you and whether this relationship makes sense, you have to be willing to cross the Rubicon and say, I am going to commit to this person in my whole heart, my mind, every fiber of my being is going to be aligned to love this person. And if you can't do that, you deserve better and he deserves better. That's where I say, just love him or just dump him. I should also emphasize, because I've written this in a conversational girlfriend-to-girlfriend tone, anytime I say him, I want to meet you wherever you are, gender, race, religion. It really is all about love. Step 2 is, I call it just stop, reflect, introspect. He says something really irritating to you and you want to freak out. Maybe you typically do freak out, but I got to ask you, how's it working for you? I'll tell you, in my relationship, when I want to freak out and I feel hurt and I feel angry and I want to lash out, it never helps. In fact, it only hurts both me and my husband. What I've figured out after doing it wrong many times is that you have that moment, whether it's in a fight or you feel disappointed or surprised or any pang of negativity that's arising from the relationship or arising from something your partner did, I just urge you to stop. Don't react. Just stop. Take a breath, give yourself even a few milliseconds to compose yourself, stop and not react. That's crucial. And then the next step is reflect. Whoa, what's going on here? Did he have a bad day? Is he going through something rough? Am I having a bad day? Am I going through something rough? What's the context here? Is it really that big of a deal that he unloaded the dishwasher wrong? Or is there something else happening that is causing you to want to freak out? Just reflect. And then finally, introspect. And this is a crucial part of phase 2, because what I have found in my own relationship, I tell the story about how my husband and I were on vacation together. We also had his whole clan of in-laws, and I love them, but they were all watching. We were out in the mountains in Beaver Creek, and they were watching World Cup soccer the whole time, and it was making me crazy. So my husband came into our unit, and I thought he was ready to spend time with me. He was getting some Doritos or beer. I was ready to freak out on him, and I was able to stop, I was able to reflect, and crucially, I was able to introspect. I realized when I was so angry at him, it wasn't because of what he was doing, it was because I felt those ancient feelings of hurt and abandonment. I didn't feel loved enough, and that's not on him, that was on me. It was on me to say, you know what? He's doing the best he can. He's having fun with his family. This is his vacation too. Let me take the high road here and not cause a big fight. So stop, reflect, introspect. That's step 2 of radical acceptance. Step 3 is radical communication. So if you've got step 1, just love him. Step 2, stop, reflect, introspect, you are more than halfway to being able to practice effective radical communication. I really emphasize here the importance of body language. It's so crucial to understand that 70+% of our communication is nonverbal. So you may be trying to bite your tongue or hold back those negative thoughts, but if you're folding your arms, if you're making grimacing faces, if you're rolling your eyes, if you're not even looking at him, you know, in a way it almost doesn't matter what you're saying because your body language is saying it all. You're mad, you're judgmental. So what I really emphasize in radical communication is try to be thoughtful about your body language. Even if you're angry, try to open up your arms, try to open up your heart, try to take several deep breaths, especially the out breath, nice and long. It calms your autonomic nervous system. It calms all the things that need to be calm in your body. And then be mindful of your tone of voice when you do speak. Of course, the words that you choose. It's so easy to blame, to be defensive, to be sarcastic, to name call, to do all those things because you're mad and you want to fight back. None of that ever helps. It only is a race to the bottom. So it starts with great body language, or at least open body language, trying to avoid the negativity and all those pitfalls that that often make communication impossible, because if one person is being controlling or blaming or defensive, it's really tough to have an open dialogue, a meaningful and constructive dialogue. And then I also really espouse the wonderful Imago communication framework that was developed by Harville Hendrix and his wife, Helen LaKelly Hunt. There's a lot to Imago, and I talk about it in the book, but effectively it's about really having a very intentional dialogue, and a dialogue that's characterized with a lot of safety. So you can sit down, if now's not the right time, because one person is feeling angry or hurt or tired, or they're just not available, find a time when you're both really present and can have a discussion. And so very briefly, the Imago is all about finding that time, creating that safe place where you can open a dialogue about things that are, it's going to be about tough stuff, because it's never hard to talk about easy stuff. It's hard to talk about hard stuff. So, you know, you may have been fighting about the dishwasher, but what's underpinning that is, I don't feel like you're paying enough attention to me. I mean, because let's face it, that's often what we are all mostly getting pretty pissed off about, is we don't feel like our partner is loving us enough. We don't feel like our partner is paying enough attention or listening. So the Imago dialogue, what it helps to do is to open up those channels so you can have a really honest conversation, devoid of blame, devoid of defensiveness, and you can say, the idea is to really base it on I. I feel like I don't get enough attention from you. Rather than you, and blame, you describe maybe what's missing or what you would like more of. Oh, it feels so good if you made plans with me more often, if you paid more attention to me, that would feel so good to me. And the person that you're having a conversation with, the idea is that they really try to paraphrase, because it is often hard when you're in that kind of emotional dialogue to really get it right. You may go back and forth multiple times. That's happened to me. I've seen it happen to many other people who are really smart, very intentional people, but they just have a hard time in that kind of emotional discussion, even though they're trying not to make it emotional. So the idea of giving the feedback, really having the other person validate it, the other person, paraphrase it. Okay, the person says that makes sense. They're not necessarily agreeing with you. They're not saying, yes, you're right and I'm horrible. They're saying, yeah, it makes sense that you would like more attention from me. And is there more? I mean, they ultimately ask you, and often there is more, and there'll be much more, right? Depending on where the relationship is. So the Imago dialogue is a very, very powerful one to surface topics that can be fraught with a lot of pain. But if you kind of start with open body language, if you really try to minimize name calling and all that divisive stuff that totally wrecks communication, and you sit down with that kind of, using those steps in the Imago framework, you can find that there is complete magic in how a lot of those ancient hurts get surfaced, and it gives you a chance to say, oh my God, I never knew you felt like that, I'm so sorry. And it gives you a chance to extend that compassion and that love to this person who, a lot of those feelings are ancient feelings. Instead of that man that you love, you realize it's the little boy who is feeling sad or feeling hurt or feeling frustrated, who needs that attention. And it is magic, because it takes so much of the ugliness out, and it reduces you as two human beings who are really trying hard to love each other. And the fourth step of radical acceptance is learning to love his unlovable parts. And this is where the first three steps of radical acceptance really are so crucial as the foundation, because it's like, what? How do I just love his unlovable parts? Well, you start with step one, just love him or just dump him. You're really committing to loving him for the long run. And I'm not saying forever. I'm not saying this is marriage. I'm not saying you're making a commitment to eternity. I'm saying loving him right here, right now, with the intention of continuing to love him right here and right now. So that's step one. Step two, of course, is stop, reflect, introspect. The idea is that you're able to take control of your own emotional reactions. Ideally, you'll become less reactive. So when those unlovable parts bubble up, as they of course will, you are in a much better frame of mind, as well as heart, if you will, to not react. And then step three is radical communication. And that also is very much about body language. You might be feeling upset, you might be feeling judgmental, but really trying to make sure that what you're communicating to him through your tone of voice, through your body, through your words, is not judgmental, but instead is more constructive. So those three steps really pave the way to step four, learning to love his unlovable parts. And this is where the rubber meets the road. He's sloppy, he's disorganized, he's got an anger problem, he's critical, he's too tall, he's too short, he's too hairy, he's not hairy enough, he dresses badly, he dresses too well. I mean, the list goes on and on of all of these traits. And I talk a little bit in the book about some of the more superficial ones, but I really emphasize, rather than the the preferences, I like to say, I like the Met, he likes the Mets, right? I'm a museum girl, he's a baseball guy. Can we ever live in peaceful harmony? Of course. Those are easier. What's harder is when his unlovable traits have to do with things like depression, or he tends to be hypercritical, he has a short temper. There are any number of those traits. He's hyper ambitious and is always working. He's totally non-ambitious and he's always on the couch, right? Everybody has their thing. And what ultimately you need to determine is, and this was ideally done in step one, are you able to make, to say, I'm going to love him. And then when it comes to those individual traits, how can I love those unlovable parts? It really is about saying, I can't cherry pick here. And there's some incredible brain science from Helen Fisher. In fact, I was kind of blown away when she gave a talk that I attended, and she talked about the three traits that are most common, and she studies the brain and the brain on love, and looks at love from a physiological perspective, not emotional, but literally the blood flow to the different parts of the brain. So she's put multiple, like 100+ people in MRIs, and what she's determined when she looks at people who have been heartbroken, who are in the short-term sort of blissful phase of relationship, but most crucial, when she looks at people who are in love after, in some cases, decades of marriage, there are 3 traits, and this comes back to, I promise I'm going to come back to step 4 and learning to love the unlovable parts of your partner. I really want to emphasize the science here because the science completely backs up what I have really espoused in my research and in my experiences of developing this. So in Helen Fisher's research, she talks about, and she's got a wonderful TED Talk on this too, she talks about how the 3 physiological traits of people who stay in love and maintain lasting love are, 1, that they tend to be more compassionate and empathetic. And she can see that from the brain scans, the parts of the brain that light up for compassion and empathy. Number 2, they practice positive illusions. And by illusions, I mean they are always looking for the positive, or mostly looking for the positive and not focusing on the negativity. She tells a great story about how a long-term partner of hers was the slowest guy in the world. He talked slow, he walked slow, he did everything slow, except for when they went to a museum and he would study a painting for maybe 20 or 30 minutes, and then they'd go to dinner afterward, and he would tell her in minute detail what he saw and what it meant to him. And she said, well, that's what I get for this man who's so dear to me. The fact that he is slow in these other ways means that he absorbs that much more. And that, in her experience of practicing positive illusions, was this beautiful way to turn what might be a negative into a positive. The third thing that she has found with her research is that the people who stay in love the longest and maintain love have more emotional control, i.e. they don't freak out easily. So it's like, he loaded the dishwasher wrong again, or he was late, or whatever the circumstance may be, and one or the other of you might want to freak out. If you can both learn to have more emotional control, there is a much greater likelihood that your relationship will also have long-lasting love. So those are the 3 traits. When I talk about learning to love his unlovable parts, it's back to the brain science. So okay, he's got a trait that you don't love. How can you extend compassion and empathy to it? Because you're not going to change it. And if anything, you say, oh, you're depressed, here, take the Xanax. You're late, here's a watch. It's only going to build resentment when you try to change him. In fact, a wonderful mentor of mine, David Bell, he talks about how how changing yourself is an act of love, and how changing another person is an act of aggression. And so learning to love the lovable parts is, it really is, at least, I'm not saying love his depression, but make peace with it. And rather than trying to continue to get him to change, it's making peace with it. So what's the platinum rule? It's taking the golden rule and kind of turning it on its head, or maybe taking it one step further. And we all know the golden rule. Love somebody as you want to be loved. The platinum rule says, not so fast. Love that person how they want to be loved. And we all know and love Gary Chapman's work and the love languages, and how he beautifully articulated the 5 most common ways that people like to show and have their love reciprocated. For example, physical touch. Another one is the gift of showing love through gifting, and physical gifts, sparkly jewelry, new boots, whatever it may be. Others love being loved by spoken language and being told how lovely they are and beautiful they are. Others like to be loved through gifts of service. I think I'm missing one. But the idea is, Sanjay loves to be loved through my homemade cooking. It's not the thing that I love. He loves to show his love through acts of service, right? And so the idea is, you have to figure out what it is that makes your partner feel the most loved. What is it? Is it going on a date together? Is it spending time with the family? Is it snuggling in bed? Is it having sex? Whatever that thing is, and it's usually not just one, it's, there's not just one thing that you can do, but those 2 or 3 are a handful of things that will make your partner feel the most loved. Figure it out and just do it. Do it regularly and without reservation. So that's the platinum rule. And that goes hand in hand with really prioritizing your partner and making sure they feel valued. And this is one of the greatest causes of divorce and dysfunction and failure in relationships, when one or the other partner doesn't feel sufficiently valued. And I talk a lot about this in my book. My husband and I simply didn't feel loved enough by one another. And it feels like a crazy thing to say because we both knew we loved each other, but we didn't feel it enough and we didn't act on it enough. And so my husband would joke, because I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a mom, I'm writing this book, I've got all this stuff cooking, and he would say to me, I know I'm 10th on your list, I'm hoping maybe I can get up to number 9. And I would kind of, of course that's not true. But as much as he joked about it, there was a kernel of truth in that. I kept putting my work first, and I was busy with our kids. And what I realized is what ultimately the signal I was sending was, you're not my priority. All these other things are my priority, and if I have a few minutes maybe next week, we can spend some time together. And so what I realized I was doing is really making him feel not prioritized, and how painful that was to him. And so the idea of prioritizing your partner really regularly, every day, they need to know they're a priority. It can't just be, on Saturday night, date night, I'm going to show up. And there are so many different ways that you can make that person feel valued. Kindness is crucially important. Dr. John Gottman's research shows that both the active presence of kindness and then the reduction of its ugly opposite, contempt. Contempt is a killer in relationships. So when I talk about showing your partner value, it is being proactive and practicing the platinum rule and loving him or her how they want to be loved. But it's those small acts of kindness, it's words of gratitude, it's compliments, given with sincerity, it's touch. It's a lot of physical touch, hug and kiss. And even if you're like, no, I'm not a PDA type, that's okay. Just go and sit next to them rather than being on the opposite sides of the room when you're watching TV. Just go sit next to each other. So there are a lot of different ways to show that your partner is a priority, but that is crucially important if you want your relationship to last. And if you do all those 5 steps, as I've described in the book, those are the secrets to happy, lasting love.